Hi, it's Carrie. In today's 5 Minute Friday, I'm on the last step of my framework for an approach to searching. A. Assess your topic. B. Brainstorm your search terms. C. Choose resources to search. D. Document your search. E. Evaluate the evidence. And here I have to say, unfortunately, this is not really my area of expertise. So I'm going to do my best to guide you and again start in the Cochrane Handbook. In the Cochrane Handbook, under Part 2, Core Methods, Chapters 7 and 8, Bias and Conflicts of Interest, and Risk of Bias in Randomized Trials. This is where you're going to find information about risk of bias for the included results. So I'll just direct you to read this. Cochrane uses the risk of bias 2 tool for randomized trials. And then they talk about other kinds of bias. And so that's a really great chapter. I'm going to go back and go to chapter 8, risk of bias in randomized trials. This goes into detail on the ROB2 tool, selecting which results to assess within the review, and then even more over here on the left, and references, which I think could help. There are other kinds of risk of bias tools, and I just did a quick Google search. I was aware of the site riskofbias.info, and it's linking to some tools that are familiar to me. So the ROB2 tool from Cochrane, Robbins E, the risk of bias in non-randomized studies of exposures, ROB-ME, risk of bias due to missing evidence, Robbins I, risk of bias in non-randomized studies of interventions, and the ROBVIS, visualization tool for risk of bias assessment and a systematic review. And if you click on any of these, it'll take you out to the citation and more information for the tool. So that's where I can point you for that. The JBI Evidence Synthesis Manual, of course, we're going to go to Systematic Reviews of Effectiveness, Chapter 4, and then go into Section 4.2.7, Critical Appraisal. It'll detail some of the principles for critical appraisal and point you to JBI tools that were created for this step of the process. So in the appendices, you'll see critical appraisal checklist for randomized controlled trials, and you'll see the critical appraisal checklist for quasi-experimental studies, non-randomized trials. And so let's just look at one. I've talked about these before. They're pretty amazing. So you can find PDF versions on the web, I believe, if you Google JBI critical appraisal checklists. But here is one of the checklists, and it's the checklist for randomized controlled trials. So ideally you would make a note of all these things, you would fill this out, and that would help you give it an overall appraisal. Now, this is a step that is usually done by 2 authors, in fact, required to be done by 2 authors. And the last thing I want to show you is, again, just see what librarians have done and what libraries are putting out on their guides. This is from the University College London, and here they have a section on systematic reviews describing and appraising studies. And if you look down, they have some videos on it from the Campbell Collaboration, another organization that is providing guidance in systematic review methods and conduct. And then if you scroll down, they have links to some critical appraisal tools. Another one of my favorites, the Critical Appraisal Skills Program, CASP, and we'll look at that one. So these are free downloadable checklists for randomized controlled trials, for systematic reviews, for qualitative studies, cohort studies, and so on and so forth. I'll make sure to put a link in the video description below. I'll go back to the University College London guide and just note that they're pointing you to Newcastle Ottawa scale, which is another one I've heard of quite a lot. And again, the risk of bias Cochrane tool, GRADE, which is doing a lot of work in guidelines as far as I am aware. One more resource I'd like to let you know about is the Latitudes Network. They have a library of validity assessment tools. So on the right, it tells you about the study type that you're assessing. And on the left, it's giving you a link to the tool. So if we looked at this one, it would link you to the tool and the website and give you the publication about the tool. Now, before I say goodbye, I just want to note that in systematic reviews and evidence synthesis, risk of bias is a distinct process from critical appraisal. And that's why I said at the beginning, I'm not the expert here, but you should definitely be consulting experts or reading these chapters from JBI and from the Cochrane Handbook and the National Academies, which is another one I'll put a link to below, and the Campbell collaboration, because they are going to give you the information that you need to choose the right tool for your project. So just keep in mind, systematic reviews, evidence synthesis, consider risk of bias to be different than critical appraisal. But if you're just doing a literature review or a narrative review, you can also use some of these critical appraisal tools that I showed you, for example, the CASP. And yes, it's complicated. That's why I'm trying to put some information out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.